started. Many of you who were here last year or the year before know Angus Watt, and therefore you'll know why we brought him back again. So without any further ado, Angus, come on in here. I'm never sure why he wears a... That's good. Never sure why you wear a red tie, though. But anyway, good to see you. Okay, you're on.
All right. Good morning, everybody. All right. I was going to have you stand up so I could say it was standing room only, but I won't do that. All right. Well, it's an honor to be asked to come back, and so thank you very much. Some of you will know some of the slides, but they'll be more updated, and some of it at the end I'm going to be talking about problem solving. A lot of people, when we take a look at Alberta, we think of ourselves as just ordinary people. But when you take a look at it, we're ordinary people that are really good at problem solving. And we don't see ourselves as researchers or scientists or great explorers. We're just everyday people, hardworking and showing up. And the challenge I'm going to leave with you today is that as you go forward, I want you to start asking more questions. All right? We were talking earlier with Perry, and he said some of the times the people aren't sure what the question is or what the problem is. And that's because you're not asking enough questions. So as we go forward today, we're going to have fun. Anybody here not want to have fun? Okay, that's what I thought. Now, I have to learn. Any lawyers? Okay. Now, I don't know about you, but from my perspective, every single day, we're always talking about inflation, right? And we're trying to get it down to 2%. And every time you talk to a housewife or anybody that goes shopping, they say, oh my God, things are so expensive. Every time you go to a restaurant, you know, and every time you buy a bag of potato chips, right? I bought a bag of potato chips a little while ago. I'm not going to buy one for another century. And you got a big bag, you open them up, and way down at the bottom are a few potato chips. And you kind of go, and they're $5 for a little bag. And you kind of go, holy smokes, this is inflation, right? And it's not just that potato chips have gone up in price, but the volume of potato chips you're getting has been reduced. So yes, inflation is bad, but let me share with you why it's bad from that perspective. And this is why when you listen to the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve, they're so focused on inflation. So, because think of it as a tax, right? Is that you're only going to get paid so much money, and the more money you have in your pocket after tax, the more money you have to spend. So the reverse is true. Okay, the reverse is true, that when you have more taxes, you have less money to spend. When you have less money to spend, then the velocity of money slows down, and your economy slows down. So we take a look at tax on individuals. Is this supposed to be on? Like it's on, but it's not on. You know, this is just like being at work. I can't get anything to work there either. All right, let's keep moving here. But is a tax on individuals reducing your purchasing power? It's a tax on industry, because the things that you're buying, whether it be a service or a restaurant, their costs are going up, their fuel costs are going up, their tire costs are going up. You know, if you're, I was listening to somebody today talking about mining and how expensive, when you're gold mining, is how expensive the tires are. When you go up to Fort McMurray and you're passing the trucks and they got these big, huge tires on. I mean, that's a ton of money, like $80,000 or $250,000 a tire, depending where they're going to go and what size they are. And if that tire goes up, then the cost of operation and the mining operation goes up. So it's a tax on industry, but it's also a tax on government. And there are a lot of people in here that are in government or related to government, mayors. And the challenge that they have is that their costs are going up. They've got less money to spend, or they have no more money to spend. And when we have, I can appreciate municipalities don't have debt, not supposed to have debt, but provincial governments and federal governments have debt. And that's where you pay your taxes to, outside of municipal taxes. And so as they have more debt, interest rates go higher, right? It's like your money on your credit card, not exactly the same rates, But the bottom line is that that government has to increase spending and increase your taxes to offset their cost of borrowing. So if they don't increase your taxes, then it means you're going to get less in services. And that's one of the big challenges governments have, is that inflation erodes their ability for infrastructure, for the hospitals, the schools, your services, is what I'm trying to say. And with those reduced services, the only way to fix that is to increase your taxes. And how many in this room people want to see an increase in their taxes? And hence, we have a problem, Houston. All right, we're just going to run through some of these slides quickly, but I want you to understand that the inflation cost in the United States, about 44% of that is housing. So as interest rates have been coming down, is that interest rates, that the housing industry gets a little bit stronger. Think of it the other way around. As interest rates moved higher, the housing slowed down. So interest rates come down, it's like a slinky. And so one of the challenges we have seasonally, and as interest rates have come down in the end of last year and the early part of this year, the housing industry in the United States is starting to percolate. But it's very different in the United States than in Canada. In Canada, our shelter cost is only 28.3%. But if you take a look in here, household operating and furnishing equipment is 14.4. So you add those two numbers together, you're very close to 44%. So your housing and operating costs. Anybody think that your power costs are going to go lower in the future? Do you think your property taxes are going down? The answer to the question is no. And it's interesting, though, in the mortgages, we talk about mortgages and people are concerned. My daughter is very concerned. You know, her mortgage comes due in a year from now. Well, she had a 2.5%, and today she can probably get a 5.3% mortgage for 5 years. She goes, Dad, do you know how much this is going to cost me? Right? So this is a Canadian problem, because in the United States, you've got 30-year mortgages versus the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year mortgages that we have in Canada. Yes, they're amortized over 25 or 30 years, but only 3.7% have a mortgage over 6%. They're paying a mortgage rate over 6% in the United States. So it's a much smaller problem in the United States than it is in Canada. 66% of Canadians are homeowners, 50% have a mortgage. I will guarantee you that won't be young people, all right? So the people that are mortgage-free are good-looking, gray hair, and mature, like me. But the bottom line is the young families, and that's where the consumer is, and 70% have a fixed-rate mortgage of the people that have a mortgage. But look at this. The problem on our mortgage refinancing isn't this year, 2024, it's 2025, and then in 2026. And this is coming from the RBC Capital, which is the largest bank in Canada. So our problem of refinancing isn't today, but it's in the next 2 years, and see what happens. And that's why I carefully say on TV, you know, you can get a 5-year mortgage rate today at 5.3%. And so what I'm really saying is you should be getting, because your prime is 7.2%. You know, a lot of people don't realize what the prime rate is. So we also have right now the COVID hangover, and we've got mental health, we've got the environment, we've got relationships, you know, delay of marriages, and starting families, and the higher costs of family housing and immigration. And we're going to talk a lot about immigration. But I will share with you that it came out about a week ago that the average age of a woman having her first child in 1976 was when she was about 26.7 years old. Now it's 32. So if you're not having your first child until you're 32, then you're not going to have 6. Unlikely. And you're going to have smaller families. Whoops. 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 Okay, so the important thing in Canada, you've heard a lot in the last year, is our immigration. And this line, share of the immigration population right here, this one, is the number of new Canadians that we have working and our population. So we can see that between 2016 and 2021, that 80% of our labor force, 80% are new Canadians. So if we didn't have them, then one of two things would happen. Either we wouldn't get the job done, or it would cost us a lot more money. So this is the participation. You know, if we're in the 70s and 80s, especially in the 80s, and you say, we're going to bring in more people to help us here in Canada, you say, we don't need them because they're going to take our jobs. Well, we're basically at full participation right now. We're in the neighborhood of 88%, and that's for the people between the ages of 25 and 54. So we need them. It's not a question that they're taking away. It's not a question that they're going to reduce our money, because especially in the province of Alberta, because we're amongst the highest paid people in Canada on a per capita basis. So we need the immigration to fulfill the jobs. So when we take a look at our immigration targets, you know, I've been saying for the last couple of years, we'll be at 5 million people in this province by the first quarter of 2025. And you know what? We're right on track with that, because we're about 4.8 million right now. We're adding 50,000 people a quarter into this province. And some quarters it's 52, 54,000, sometimes it's 48, 49,000. But we're basically adding 50,000 people per quarter. So the numbers in the blue are talking about the number of people right now is on a benchmark to be coming into Canada. The challenges are many, and for sure, the schools, the hospitals, we take a look at this, the housing, which we'll talk about in a second. And according to CMHC, we need 3.5 million homes above what's already planned to house everybody the way that we think they should be housed. And the question is, do we have the labor capacity to build the houses? And then in the schools and the hospitals? And then once we build the schools and hospitals, do we have the principals and teachers and nurses and doctors to fill them? And I'll tell you that you think our healthcare problem is a little slack right now from the standpoint of trying to find yourself a doctor. Do not go to BC and do not go to Ontario, because then the list is 3 times as long to find a doctor. What have I done here? Nothing is what I've done. There you go. Okay, let's take a look at home builders. This just shows you the red dotted line is the population growth, and then you take a look at the number of new homes being built, home starts. They just don't compute. A picture says 1,000 words. This is $1 million slide. This is $1 trillion slide from that aspect to it. And by the way, you can get a copy of our slides. Just ask for a copy from your organization here, and we'll get a copy from Perry to take care of you. Now, shelter costs are keeping inflation above 3%, and this is interesting because everybody got excited when our inflation rate came in at 2.9% and said, oh, hey, we're below 3 and we're on our way to 2. That's because the gasoline prices were down. Now they're back up again. Interesting. But look at housing shelter costs. You're closer to 6%, right? 6% is nowhere close to 2 or 3. And then we're just, if we're correct with the lower interest rates, and we feel, you talk to somebody in the real estate business, they'll tell you they're really busy right now. And that would suggest to me that in Alberta, in Canada, and in the United States, you're going to see that the housing industry is picking up a little bit. The challenge is in the slinky, as it picks up, then rates will end up going higher because inflation will go through. So standard of living is a standstill. This is an interesting slide. How many people feel that they're wealthier today than they were a year or two ago? Look around, it's interesting, eh? Because on an after-tax basis, as you got more people coming into it, on a per capita basis, we actually have less money, right? Even though we might be making a little bit more, but effectively, when you take a look at it, we're not. In the United States, where you have they're 2 different economies. The United States is an economy until itself. It's not the same in Europe. They're much more like we are. It's not the same in China, which is very different. And it's not the same in Japan, although Japan's getting closer to what we're doing here in Canada and Alberta. They're bringing in immigration. So as our economy is slowing down on a per capita basis, as we take a look at it, as a consumer confidence is falling and slipping. So if you feel that you're not in an economic boom right now, you're not alone. And we call this a population trap. And this is a challenge that every province has. This is one when you're going to see next week in our budget. They're not going to call it a population trap, I doubt it. But it's a problem we have when we're bringing in as many Canadians as we have right now. Our population in the month of January grew by 4%. Our number of 0.4%. Our number of new jobs grew by 0.2. So this trend has been in place for a number of months, if not quarters. So in other words, we got more people working, so we say, holy smokes, look at all the jobs we're adding. You know, sometimes tenfold what we're looking for, right? but the population growth is 20-fold more. And these people, from a standpoint of taxes, you people are paying, the taxes that you're paying today are, are for last year's, based on last year's value of your house, value of your income, your hospitals, your schools, but now you got more people that are trying to use them. So this is a population trap, as we call it, because effectively there's less money for everybody on a per capita basis. This is a short-term pain. This is something you have to go through to come up with a stronger economy. But this, some people think we'll have this for 2 years or 3 years. I think personally this will take 3 to 5 years for us to go through it. Year 4, year 5 will be better, but the bottom line is that for our governments to get the municipalities and provinces and the federal government, God bless them. That was a joke. No. Is that it's a challenge that everybody in government's going to have, that it's how to provide more with less. And I'm sure next week we'll see that in our budget as well. And they will focus on reducing debt, right? But they have to focus on reducing some of the debt, because if we don't reduce the debt, then that means we have to pay more in taxes because we're paying higher interest rates. So we go through an unprecedented surge right now in our population. This shows you in Canada's population how we've just taken off. Now let's take a look at something more exciting, how it is composed of our population. I want you to look at the circle in red there, because that's the number of new births. That's our natural growth. If you take a look at Canada right here, and we just focus on this dark line here, and we're down here right now, does that look like an economy that would be strong and growing and prosperous, right? The answer for me is no. But look at what we're doing in our population growth. It's just soaring right now. So let's take a look and see where and how. In Ontario, Ontario's interesting because their population, their birth rate is shrinking and continues to shrink. The red is people that are leaving Ontario to other provinces, okay? Such as Alberta and such as the Maritimes. So when you take a look at the red, is that you can see if you went back to 2014, people are moving into Ontario probably because the housing industry, things are going really well, and they needed workers, and they were happy to go, and real estate prices were going up. You could buy a house and it was going to go up in price, and you say, this is fantastic, great spot to live. But it's become unaffordable, and so people are leaving it, and especially as more people come into it. But again, as far as the birth rate goes, there's nothing exciting here. This doesn't look like a population that's growing. So if you looked at this and we were off in somewhere in the world and say, hey, do you want to move to this province? You kind of say, why is everybody leaving it, right? Why are people in Canada leaving it? British Columbia, people are leaving it. For decades, we had people moving into British Columbia, but they're now leaving it. And that's, again, the immigration's coming in. We take a look at Alberta. Look at our birth rate. You know, we're really doing very well on our birth rates versus the rest of Canada. We take a look, we got people coming into our province in red there, and we've got some immigration coming in. So if I was outside of Canada, I would say, hey, this is a place that I want to go, because other Canadians are going there as well. Is this place Florida? Not exactly. We have a higher tax rate than they do there. Anyways, so then we take a look at affordability. This just shows you've seen these type of slides before. Vancouver is at the top, followed by Toronto. This is the numbers you take a look at. Edmonton, $456,000 for the average price of a home. You know, your household has to have $112,000. That seems reasonable for a family or a single person to make $112,000 in the economy that we have today, whether it be a family or an individual, right? So there's a chance that you might be able to own a house with a backyard. Unbelievable, right? And it would only take you 30 months to save for it. In Toronto, it takes you 311 months, and you have to earn $254,000. And in Vancouver, 464 months, and you have to earn $350,000. I would like to earn $350,000 and live in Edmonton. That's what that tells me. So when we take a look at Alberta, right, build the highway and they will come, like the field of dreams, right? We're out here in the agricultural world. Think of the field of dreams, and that's where we are. So fasten your seatbelts. And I want you to know I've been out here for 45 years, and I used to live in Toronto. Okay. And I've been waiting to see the Edmonton-Calgary corridor fill in. And it's doing that in the last 10 years. And you just see more and more buildings around it. And you see, I kind of smile and laugh at the same time, because when I came out here about 47 years ago, people would always complain how far, and we'd have people come from Toronto or Montreal, and they'd take a look and say, they'd always say to us, your airport is so far away from the city, right? You look at it today, and you think you're in the city. And you never go have that question about the airport being far out from the city. It's just filled in. The question you might be asking is, who's living in all those homes? But the answer is, how many more homes we need, right? That'd be the challenge that we have. Anyways, we're in a very exciting time as it fills in. We take a look at all provinces' growth. The red is Canada at 3.2. Alberta, our growth rate is 4.3%. And we're talking about population here. And that's in the third quarter of 2023 versus the growth rate of a year to the third quarter of 2023 to 2022, in case there's an accountant here. Whew. But if we were a country, and we were talking about separation earlier, we're not in a hurry to separate today, but if we were a country, we'd be the fastest growing country in the world right now at 4.1%, a slightly different time period. And that's in 2022. Canada is respectable at 3%. So when we take a look at the next 5 years, what do we have in front of us? Okay, we've got a strong interprovincial and international immigration or migration into this province. People from other provinces want to come and work here in Alberta, right? We've got an increased demand in housing, schools, and healthcare and infrastructure. So that's going to create a ton of jobs. It's just by definition. As we build the schools and we have the teachers, we need the nurses, we need the doctors. We will have a shortage of skilled workforce, which we will have in other parts of Canada. We're going to have new residents in Alberta, and what are they looking for? They're looking for a home, they're looking for a backyard, and a school that's nearby, not something that's 5 miles or 10 miles away. And they're looking for a place to develop a career, and they're looking for a place to raise a family. They don't want to be in a concrete Congo. They're looking that they can have a professional career, have an honest job, make an honest wage, and have a backyard and a family and a community. And we have it right here in Alberta. Now, it was interesting. This past fall, I was inducted to the Alberta Order of Excellence. There were 8 Albertans that were chosen. It was a great honor. But it was a real eye-opening. Thank you very much. It's really about the other 7 people, okay? But thank you. Joe Lucas, he made a comment in his speech. He says, you know what? And he's a world-renowned problem solver engineer. He says in Alberta, and he came from Hungary in 1958, so he wasn't born in Alberta. And I share that with you because as we have new people moving to our province, whether they're moving from BC or Saskatchewan, we're quite used to having people move from Saskatchewan, okay? But from Ontario or from elsewhere in the world, these people are here to make a contribution. And Joe, he says, we're problem solvers in Alberta. And I want you to understand that. He doesn't see himself as a researcher, a mad scientist, right? He's a problem solver. And it's interesting because many farmers solved their problems in the old days by not selling their tractors when one broke down. They would, when the new tractor became an old tractor, they would go back to the old one to get parts to solve the problems that they had on the current tractor. So you always look for a way to resolve your problem internally because that's what you did. So Joe was brought the problem and said, how many people remember acid rain? Right? The reason you don't hear about acid rain is because of Joe. They went to Joe and said, Joe, we got a problem. This acid rain is creating a huge problem for us. It's killing our trees, it's killing our lakes, killing the fish. And he said, can you fix it? He said, well, how do you measure it? Well, we don't measure it. Like, we don't really know what it is, we don't know how to measure it, and we don't know what to do about it. He said, well, let's first of all see if we can measure it. So he measures it. And once he finds out what's in it, then he can say, okay, now I can fix the problem of what's in it and put the filters and everything else in control so you don't hear about acid rain today. So he doesn't look at himself as a great researcher. He's renowned now on a global basis. He just sees himself as a problem solver. They had another one down in Medicine Hat. They had all this mustard seed from World War I, or mustard gas, and they didn't know how to get rid of it. They went to Joe. Joe, we got all this mustard gas. How do we get rid of it? He said, I don't know. Let me think about it. You got a problem here. Next thing you know, he fixed it. Now we don't have a problem. We don't have mustard gas stored in Medicine Hat. So he got rid of it. So his message to us is that Albertans, we're problem solvers, right? Each one of us have a family that have taught us to solve problems. Then I take a look at Don Stanley at Stantec, a chap who I got to know very well when I was much younger. Stantec now has 28,000 employees. But you know, Don Stanley had a problem, right? He didn't have a problem. The communities outside of Edmonton had a problem, indoor plumbing. So he was there, and he went through, and he says, you know, I can make a job out of this. You know, let's see, indoor plumbing. So he went, and it's interesting because he sent out 600 letters and drove 27,000 kilometers, like in a month, which is now 17,000 miles, actually in 4 months. And he knocked on everybody's door and said, for $5,000, I can solve your problem. I'll give you a plan. And so that's how Stantec, which is known around the world with 28,000 employees, got started for fixing our problem of indoor sewage and water in your local municipal communities. And you go, oh, isn't that interesting? Then I take a look at Bruce Saville. Bruce Saville was working for Goodyear, and he was in the computer. There he was, and they would give him stacks, probably fill this room here, this platform, of data every month. They just print it all out and say, we need this summarized at the end of the month. And he went to the computer department and the tech department and said, hey, I got a problem. And they go away, we don't have time for you. So he's a goalie. If anybody knows the story about Bruce Saville, he loved to play goal. He loved to play hockey. And he was playing hockey one night, and he was talking about this problem. And one of the guys says, well, you know, here's some books on the software that we have at the time, Cobalt, which you people have sure never heard of. And he ended up resolving the problem. He ended up then coming to Alberta, ended up, you know, when we started the cell phones, which are like 20 years old, they're not as long as a cell phone. How do you bill when you call from here to India, here to Florida? How do you do the billing on it? And Bruce said, well, let me work on it. And he had a problem. He solved it, and then he sold his company for $700 million, right? It was a problem. You just fixed it. Let's see what happens to it. Amazon, right here in our backyard, at Christmas time, they were putting out 600 parcels, fulfillments in a minute, okay? In a minute, and that's happening right here in your backyard, right? One of the most modern plants that they have, and you kind of go, whoa. And I think 600 million, or 600 packages in a minute. I'm thinking, how do they package that? And then I'm thinking, well, maybe, is that something that hemp could use? Because when I go to the dump, we have a little neighborhood area where you take your cartons, right? And every Saturday I put it in, and the guy tells me make sure I separate it properly, and I do. I'm a good citizen, and he thanked me for being a good citizen, right? But all these boxes that my wife has and my daughter has and the families have, and you put them in the thing, and I think, well, is there another way that we could have this packaging that's more renewable or better, that could last longer? And so I'm thinking, oh, you know, maybe the plastic, hard, you weave something together, and you kind of go, I wonder whether that'd be something in the hemp industry. If I was in the hemp industry, is that something I might be doing? And then Capital Power came out with a nuclear power presentation, announcement, and they say, hey, we're working with the province of Ontario, which is good. They got over 50 years of experience in nuclear power. And they said, listen, if you do any work on the power demands the world's going to need in the future, nuclear power is going to be part of this, okay? But the biggest problem with nuclear power is, what do you do with nuclear waste? And I'm thinking, I wonder if you could put it in something that hemp would make and, you know, package it so it contained, weave so it couldn't get out from that standpoint. And you kind of go, oh, isn't that interesting? I can think those things because I'm not sitting there looking at my hemp field, right? And the challenge, we were talking earlier, I think over here, we're looking at the barn, and there you are looking at your barn and say, you know, I'm looking at my barn and think how I can diversify my economy, and I'm thinking, I wonder if the barn needs to be painted this year. So one of the things that you have in a networking session like today is to test yourselves, to stretch yourself, right, to network, and say, hey, we're early in this. How can I be a Don Stanley? How can I be a Bruce Saville, right? How can I make $700 million? How can I create a company that would have 28,000 employees in it? But you know what? Not everything needs to be big to be better, right? But you're not a startup anymore. You're beyond that. You're in an industry, and you've got a lot of successes that you're having improving. And you've got some virgin lands and territories that you're working on. Think of it from this aspect. Where else could you find Elk Lake in the world today? You're not going to find it in Ontario. You're not going to find it in the United States of America. You're not going to find it in Europe. You're probably not going to go to China. And you're probably not going to find it in India. So sometimes we just don't know the luxury and the benefits and the advantages we have in our own backyard as we look at our barn. Thank you very much.
We've got a few minutes. Anybody want to pose a question for what's your name?
Angus. What?
Anybody got a question for Angus? That was Sterling. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. My name is Kareem with Sturgeon County, municipality north of Edmonton. One comment, one question. The comment is I appreciate the reference to immigration and folks that immigrate being contributors. I think that's an undertold story oftentimes. As a child of a family of immigrants, I appreciate that. The question I would like to start with is, you referenced the tax base and the municipal, provincial, federal government's role and all of that. What are the municipal and provincial government roles in attempting to resolve this current economic situation? What can those levels of government do to support industry, to support its residents, to support the programming it delivers, despite these economic complex challenges?
You know, it's a really good question, and I'll tell you what I think I just heard, is that how can we make governments work? How can we work with governments and for success and be efficient going forward and create industries, create jobs, and a community that we all can be proud of. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things we need to do is be able to work together. It doesn't matter where I go in Canada, is that every time I hear, like in the housing industry, people talk about how difficult it is to get along with municipalities and the cities and everything else, and the time changes. And I had one friend that they were working on a $100 million project with the municipality. They went through the first reading, the second reading, and they thought everything was good. And then the municipality turned them down on the third reading. And they'd spent millions of dollars getting there, and time and effort, and you can't replace time. And so that doesn't only send a message to that company, but to everybody else. And so I don't think it's a unique problem. What would make us unique if we could work together? And I'm not sure exactly how that will happen, but I will say that we need to make an effort to try to make it happen. And I'm thinking after COVID right now, everybody's got their hands in their pocket when it comes to politics. And they just say, it's not my problem. But it is everybody's problem. We're not alone. So we have to kind of refreshen ourselves and say, we want to make a difference. And the challenge is that it could be Elk Point this time, say, hey, we got a great idea, support us. And everybody goes, well, that's nice, but I don't have any money. I can't do anything from that aspect to it. You know, last June, I was out speaking at the hub, and there you got a corridor of counties that are trying to work together. And you need something like that where you have the relationships, right? And you need to have the relationships then with the deputy minister of the province. You need to have it with the different municipalities and work together from that aspect to it. It's the only way that I can imagine it's going to work. When I was in Ontario, is that I was politically active. It didn't matter what I was doing. You know, whether it be the mayor lived around the corner from us, Mr. Crosby, and you might work on his campaign, you might work on this and everything else. You're just a kid and you're just having fun. Sometimes I'd work on a liberal campaign, sometimes I'd work on a conservative campaign. But what I learned is that in Ontario, everybody felt they had some input into both the provincial and federal government. When I moved out west and I went through the first election, federal election, and I found out we had a majority Liberal government by the time they opened the TVs from Winnipeg. I go, they haven't even counted my vote, right? So I realized that our input into federal politics was less meaningful, is a polite way to put it. And, but provincial politics, I was active for many years, talking to the different ministers and working in different campaigns quietly and raising money for a party. And I had great insight. There were lots of things happening. We've kind of changed the way that we can raise money, for sure. And so that activity for the business people has just disappeared. And so it takes people in this community and associations to regenerate that discussion. And what I find with the ministers, deputy ministers that we have today, is that they're very open to the conversations and discussions because they want to know what you're thinking. They're looking for ideas. They want to diversify our province. They want to diversify, they want to strengthen it. The challenge they're going to have, and you're going to notice this, you say, how come we're not getting more in this budget if we've got a surplus? And the answer is because of this trap that we have right now where we've got more people coming in and we've got more demands on our schools and our hospitals and our doctors and everything else and our infrastructure and our roads. Anthony Henday is full. Imagine what would happen if we didn't have the Anthony Henday. So I think we need to, as associations, because that's the only way I think it's going to get done, like whatever they might be, even today, and the networking that you're doing today, you need to meet people, you need to have discussions, they need to know, you know, you got to be like Stephen Covey, you have to learn to understand before trying to be understood, and I think that's what we need to do. And right now, the field's wide open.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Do I have
Short
time
answer,
for a quick yes/no before?
Pardon me?
Do I have time for a quick yes/no question before you step away? The shortage of oil and gas workers that you referenced there, or the shortage of skilled labor that you referenced in the PowerPoint presentation, does that include oil and gas workers that are not currently in oil and gas and doing other things, or does that include the oil and gas workers that are skilled that are not in oil and gas anymore?
It would include the work they're doing today, wherever they're working today.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I asked him last year if he was thinking of getting into politics, and he said his wife wouldn't allow that. So, extraordinary, Angus. Thank you. Absolutely no disappointment whatsoever. Thumbs up.